This is the WHTC Morning News with Gary Stevens and Peg McNichol on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
Welcome back to the WHTC Morning News for this Tuesday, September 28th. Tuesday mornings, we have the opportunity to get the thoughts of what's going on in Washington with one of the two men who represent the Lakeshore in the U.S. House. He is 18-term U.S. House Republican Fred Upton of St. Joseph, and he's on the other end of our Zoom connection this morning. Fred, good morning. Hope all is well with you and the family.
Well, it is. Good morning and thanks. I hope it's the same with all of our listeners too.
First of all, before we go a little bit into some of the things that we are doing in Washington right now, your thoughts about a preliminary look at the Independent Redistricting Committee, basically divvying up the Lakeshore three ways, and Ottawa County would be split up three ways. Your district would be part of it, as well as Bill Heisinger's district, as well as Peter Meyer's district. Some say this is supposed to end gerrymandering and keep communities of interest together. Others are saying you can't legislate that even with a voter initiative, Fred. I know you're on the sidelines on this in terms of, Congress can't do anything about it, but you got to be scratching it like, what's going to be in my district when I run for re-election next year?
Well, it is a crazy time. And of course, because we've had population loss, we're going to lose yet another seat. That means an electoral vote as well that we won't have in 2024. And the voters, decided on a ballot initiative back in 2018 that was going to take it out of the hands of the governor and the legislature. Traditionally, it's been split between control of Republicans and Democrats, and somehow they've always been able to put together a map. In fact, the map that was done remember, this is done every 10 years after the census. So when it was done in 2012, we also lost a seat, as we're losing a congressional seat this time. Then we actually had Republican Governor Snyder, Republican House and Senate. They developed a plan. The Democrats didn't challenge it in courts. It was okay with them. And in fact, the delegation is 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. Pretty fair. You look at our district today, there's no gerrymandering. It's almost a perfect square in Southwest Michigan. Most of the districts are pretty contiguous. You don't have this thing called gerrymandering, with perhaps the exception of some of the what we call majority minority districts, African-American districts that were drawn in the southeast part of the state. Again, that's the Voting Rights Act requires that. So those districts may look a little bit different. The voters decided we'll give this to a panel of folks who have no political experience at all, take it out of the hands of the governor. In this case, would have been Gretchen Whitmer and the House and the Senate. And they had a number of meetings around the state, and they're developing these plans. I think there have been about 24 so far. I've tried not to. I haven't lost any sleep over them. They're going to change again this week. Who knows what it'll look like? They're going to have more meetings around the state. It'll be a good number of weeks, if not months, before we actually see what our district is going to end up looking like.
Yeah, I just brought that up because the Ottawa County Clerk was sounding some alarms about it yesterday. Now, top Democrats are racing against the clock to avoid a government shutdown this week. Money runs out at the stroke of midnight on Thursday. U.S. House passed a bill last week to extend funding, but Senate Republicans blocked it yesterday. The sticking point appears to be raising the debt limit. Democrats must now decide if they'll remove that provision when they try to pass the bill again later on this week. Fred, your thoughts?
Well, this is not unexpected. The House, Nancy Pelosi muscled this thing through. She extended the debt ceiling without even picking a number, a figure in terms of what the debt ceiling should be. And remember, this is a lot like a credit card. You have a balance, you have a credit limit. So does the federal government. That limit has to be raised, as we don't have a balanced budget. And the two were combined together. That is keeping the government open, as well as raising the debt ceiling to an unannounced number, just simply a date. She passed it in the House, partisan vote. The Senate was always going to reject it. They did last night. What I expect to happen now is that the debt ceiling provision will be jettisoned from the what we call the continuing resolution, keeping the government open, and we'll have just a pure, clean vote on keeping the government open, not sending people home. It's funding levels at last year's level. Remember, the fiscal year changes September 30th. So there'll be a freeze on spending at last year's level, which actually saves the taxpayers money. And I expect that will pass in the next day or two, and at least punt it for another month, as the Senate has yet to pass any of the appropriation bills. That's got to happen. And this will probably happen once or twice more before we get to December, when the rubber really hits the road. As it relates to the debt ceiling, I'm not sure what's going to happen. There's always a little wiggle room here. The administration, remember, I was part of one working for President Reagan a long time ago. The date's never quite exactly what they say that it is. So there's a little fudge room there, but that'll be an issue that'll be decided in another week or two in terms of how that happens. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be tied to keeping the government open. Well, I'm pretty confident that we'll keep the government open, not have to face a shutdown come Thursday night.
Now, the White House is challenging Republicans to work with Democrats on crafting serious bipartisan immigration reform. Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. immigration system has been broken throughout Republican and Democratic administrations, describing border surges as cyclical, and accused Republicans of being more interested in talking points than serious immigration reform. You, along with Tony Gonzalez, your Republican colleague from Texas, sent a letter asking the Biden administration to enforce the nation's immigration bill, and urges the administration to reinstate the effective Remain in Mexico policy. Your thoughts?
Well, that's right. We have a crisis at the border. I've been to the border. I've seen it firsthand. And we need not only border security, we need to finish the wall in terms of the areas where it needs to be, but we also need to do the proper reforms with DACA kids and families. But we also need to make sure, one of the things that happened here was that the Biden administration reversed the Trump administration's policy on staying in another country before you enter here, if you're seeking asylum. The Biden administration did that almost day one of their administration. And as a consequence, we're going to see hundreds of thousands of folks cross the border. It's averaging about 150,000 now a month. That's got to be reversed. But I happen to believe that there is, and I saw a little bit of the White House press conference on TV yesterday. I happen to believe that there is room for a compromise that could be bipartisan, that includes border security and really effective means of immigration reform. So far, that hasn't happened, and we all need to work together to get it done. But clearly, this was spurred by the Biden's administration failure to keep in place what the Trump team had done.
And one final thing, you and your colleague from across the state, Debbie Dingell, the Democrat from Dearborn, visited the National COVID Memorial, and that's a very poignant situation there.
Well, it is, and I'm going back again this week. Literally on the mall by the Washington Monument, there are more than 670,000 individual flags, white flags, representing an American who died of COVID. And we've reached out to our constituents saying, if you'd like me to place a flag with your family member's name on it, I will do that a little bit later with Debbie Dingell. It's bipartisan. You see this wave of white flags that are just waving with the breeze, and you just wonder what if. It's really tragic and a real moment to reflect on where we've been the last year and a half, hoping that we can end this thing soon.
He is Congressman Fred Upton, joins us Tuesday mornings to talk about some of the issues going on in Washington. Fred, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your time. And if all goes well, let's do this again next Tuesday morning.
It'll happen.
Thank you very much, Fred Upton, on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.